Picture this. You're scrolling through social media at 2 a.m., watching people half your age launching businesses, getting married, buying houses, or achieving what feels like everything you haven't yet accomplished. That familiar weight settles in your chest, the one that whispers you're behind, you're failing, you're running out of time. But what if I told you that this feeling, this deep sense of being off schedule, is actually the beginning of your most important journey? Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche, and one of his most profound discoveries was that our souls don't follow the timeline society creates for us. In fact, he believed that the pressure to conform to external schedules is one of the greatest obstacles to becoming who we're truly meant to be. The anxiety you feel about being behind isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a signal that you're ready to step into your authentic timeline. Let me ask you something. When you look at your life, do you measure it by what you haven't done yet or by who you're becoming? Because there's a difference between living on society's clock and living on soul time. And understanding this difference might just change everything about how you see your journey. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your authentic self. But here's what most people don't realize. Individuation doesn't happen according to anyone else's schedule. It happens when you're ready, when your psyche has prepared you, when the circumstances of your life have created the exact conditions you need for growth. You're not behind because there's nowhere you're supposed to be except exactly where you are. Think about it like this. Imagine you're watching a master gardener tend to different plants. The roses bloom in June, the chrysanthemums in autumn, the daffodils in early spring. Would you ever tell the gardener that the chrysanthemums are behind because they're not blooming when the roses do? Of course not. Each flower has its season, its perfect timing, its unique contribution to the garden's beauty. Your life is no different. You know that feeling, right? That sense that everyone else figured out the secret manual to life while you were still trying to understand the instructions? Jung would tell you that this feeling is actually sacred. It's your psyche's way of protecting you from living someone else's life. The discomfort you feel when you compare yourself to others isn't inadequacy. It's your soul saying that path isn't yours to walk. But our culture tells us a different story. It gives us arbitrary deadlines. Graduate by 22, find your career by 25, get married by 30, have children by 35, achieve success by 40. These timelines aren't based on psychological wisdom or spiritual truth. They're based on social conditioning, economic structures, and collective anxiety. They have nothing to do with when your soul is ready to bloom. Jung discovered that the first half of life is typically about building an ego, establishing ourselves in the world, meeting social expectations. But the second half of life, and this can begin at any age, is about something entirely different. It's about meaning, authenticity, integration, and becoming whole. The two halves of life operate on completely different timelines, and trying to force the second half to happen according to first half rules is like trying to make a butterfly emerge from its cocoon on your schedule instead of nature's. Picture yourself as a river. Society wants you to be a straight canal, flowing predictably from point A to point B, arriving at predetermined destinations at predetermined times. But rivers don't work that way. They wind, they meander, they pool in quiet places. They rush over rocks. They carve their own paths through the landscape. Sometimes they seem to flow backward. Sometimes they disappear underground only to emerge somewhere unexpected. The river isn't behind schedule. It's following the natural law of water, which is to find its own way. Your life is that river. Every detour, every delay, every moment when you felt stuck or lost was actually the water of your being finding its natural course. The job you stayed in too long taught you what you didn't want. The relationship that ended opened space for the person you're becoming. The dreams you abandoned made room for dreams you didn't even know you had. The years you spent confused were years your psyche was preparing you for something you couldn't have handled earlier. Let me ask you something else. What if the things you think you're behind on are actually things you're being protected from until you're ready? Jung believed that the unconscious mind is infinitely wiser than the conscious mind, and that it orchestrates our lives with a precision we can barely comprehend. The promotion you didn't get, the relationship that didn't work out, the opportunity that slipped away. What if these weren't failures, but redirections? I remember Jung's story about a patient who came to him devastated because she was 40 and still unmarried. She felt like a failure, like she'd missed her chance at happiness. But through their work together, she discovered that her psyche had been protecting her from relationships that would have stunted her growth. Her soul knew she needed those years to develop parts of herself that would have been suppressed in premature partnerships. When she finally met her life partner at 45, she was ready for a depth of connection that wouldn't have been possible in her 20s or 30s. This is what Jung meant when he said that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own agenda. Your unconscious mind isn't just a repository of forgotten memories, it's an active force that's constantly working to bring you into alignment with your authentic self. And sometimes that means slowing you down, redirecting you, or keeping you from getting what you think you want until you're ready for what you actually need. You know that feeling when you look back on your life and suddenly see the pattern, how everything that seemed random or painful or frustrating was actually preparing you for where you are now. That's not coincidence. That's your psyche's perfect timing revealing itself. The years you spent feeling lost were years you were being found. The time you thought you were wasting was time you were investing in becoming who you needed to be. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jung discovered that this process of becoming yourself doesn't just happen to you, it happens through you. You're not a passive victim of timing. You're an active participant in your own unfolding. The key is learning to recognize the difference between productive action and anxious forcing. One flows from your authentic self, the other flows from your wounded ego. Think about it like this. When you're anxious about being behind, you're operating from what Jung called the ego's agenda. The ego wants external validation, social approval, measurable achievements. It wants to prove that you're worthy, successful, normal. But when you're aligned with your authentic timing, you're operating from what Jung called the self, the deeper, wiser part of you that knows your true purpose and perfect pace. Picture yourself trying to force a flower to bloom by pulling at its petals. What happens? You destroy the flower. But when you give it the right conditions, good soil, adequate water, proper sunlight, it blooms naturally, beautifully, in its own time. Your life is that flower. The more you try to force it to bloom according to external timelines, the more you damage your natural unfolding. But when you create the right internal conditions, self-acceptance, patience, trust in your process, you bloom organically. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means you learn to take inspired action rather than desperate action. Inspired action feels like cooperation with your natural flow. Desperate action feels like fighting against yourself. One comes from trust, the other comes from fear. Let me ask you this. What would change in your life if you truly believed you were exactly where you needed to be? Not where you wanted to be, not where you thought you should be, but where you needed to be for your soul's evolution. How would you show up differently? How would you treat yourself? How would you make decisions? Jung believed that every person carries within them a unique blueprint, what he called the unlived life. This isn't just about unfulfilled dreams or unused potential. It's about the specific way you're meant to contribute to the world, the particular gifts you're meant to develop, the unique healing you're meant to facilitate. And this blueprint doesn't unfold according to anyone else's schedule. It unfolds according to the mysterious timing of the soul. You know that feeling when something finally clicks into place? When an opportunity appears at exactly the right moment? When you meet the right person at the perfect time? When circumstances align in ways that feel almost magical? That's not luck. That's your authentic timing revealing itself. Those moments when everything flows effortlessly are glimpses of what life feels like when you're aligned with your natural rhythm. But our culture trains us to distrust this natural timing. We're taught to be proactive, to make things happen, to seize control. And while there's value in taking action, Jung discovered that the most profound transformations happen through what he called active patience, the ability to remain engaged with your life while trusting the process that's unfolding. Picture yourself as a surfer. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to read them, to position yourself, to flow with their energy rather than fighting against it. The waves of opportunity, growth, and change in your life follow natural patterns just like ocean waves. Learning to surf these patterns rather than trying to control them is one of the most important skills you can develop. This requires a different kind of courage than our culture typically celebrates. It's not the courage to push harder or move faster. It's the courage to slow down, to listen, to trust the intelligence of your own becoming. It's the courage to disappoint people who want you to be on their timeline. It's the courage to look foolish to those who don't understand that depth takes time. Jung spent years studying what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to guide our lives in mysterious ways. He discovered that when we're aligned with our authentic timing, synchronicities increase dramatically. Doors open, people appear, opportunities emerge, but when we're forcing ourselves to live according to external schedules, synchronicities dry up because we're not in harmony with the natural flow of our existence. You know those moments when you feel like you're swimming upstream, when everything feels hard and forced and nothing seems to work? Those are signals that you're out of alignment with your natural timing. But then there are those other moments when everything flows, when solutions appear, when the right words come, when you feel like you're being carried by some invisible current. Those are signals that you're in harmony with your soul's rhythm. Let me ask you something. What if the pressure you feel to be caught up is actually keeping you from catching up with yourself? What if all the energy you spend worrying about being behind is energy that could be used to move forward? What if the timeline you're trying to follow isn't even yours? Jung discovered that many people spend the first half of their lives trying to become someone they're not, and the second half trying to become who they really are. The transition between these two phases can be disorienting, painful, and slow. It often feels like you're moving backward, losing ground, falling behind. But actually, you're shedding the false self to reveal the true self underneath. You're not behind, you're finally catching up with who you've always been. Picture yourself as a snake shedding its skin. The process is uncomfortable, vulnerable, and slow. The old skin doesn't come off all at once. It peels away gradually, leaving the snake temporarily raw and exposed. But underneath is newer, more flexible skin that's better suited for the snake's continued growth. Your life transitions work the same way. What feels like being stuck or going backward is often the necessary process of shedding what no longer serves you. This is why Jung emphasized that the goal isn't to get somewhere faster, it's to become more fully yourself along the way. The destination isn't separate from the journey. The journey is the destination. Every moment of confusion, every period of waiting, every experience of feeling lost is actually part of your becoming. You're not behind because there's nowhere to be except where you are. But here's what's beautiful about understanding this. Once you stop fighting your natural timing, you start to see the perfection in your path. You begin to recognize that your struggles were your training, your delays were your preparation, your detours were your education. The very things that made you feel behind were actually keeping you on your unique and irreplaceable path. You know that feeling when you finally understand why something happened the way it did? When you can see how a difficult period prepared you for something wonderful that came later? That's the feeling of recognizing your soul's perfect timing. It's the moment when you realize that your life hasn't been a series of random events, it's been a carefully orchestrated becoming. Jung called this the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which the psyche integrates opposites and creates something new. Your feelings of being behind and your desire to move forward, your impatience and your need for patience, your dreams and your reality. These apparent contradictions are actually working together to create the person you're becoming. The tension between them isn't a problem to be solved, it's a creative force to be honored. Picture yourself as a master chef creating a complex dish. Some ingredients need to be added early and cooked slowly. Others need to be added at the very last moment to preserve their essence. The chef doesn't rush the process or try to add everything at once. They trust the recipe, trust the timing, trust that each ingredient will contribute its unique flavor at exactly the right moment. Your life is that complex dish, and you are both the chef and the ingredient that needs to be added at exactly the right time. This understanding changes everything about how you approach your life. Instead of asking, "Why am I so behind?" you start asking, "What is this timing teaching me?" Instead of, "What's wrong with me?" you ask, "What's right about this moment?" Instead of, "How can I catch up?" you ask, "How can I show up more fully to where I am?" Let me ask you this. What if being behind is actually a privilege? What if it means You get to approach life with the wisdom of experience, the depth of having lived, the clarity that comes from having tried other paths. What if the very fact that you're not where you thought you'd be means you're exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to be? Jung discovered that the people who made the most significant contributions to the world were often those who felt most out of step with their times. They were the ones who couldn't fit into conventional timelines, who marched to the beat of their own drums, who trusted their inner compass even when it pointed in a different direction from everyone else's. Your sense of being behind might actually be a sign that you're being called to pioneer a different way of being. You know those people who seem to have it all figured out, who hit all the conventional milestones on schedule? Jung would tell you that many of them are living what he called the false self, a persona designed to meet external expectations rather than express authentic being. They might look successful from the outside, but they're often deeply unfulfilled because they're living someone else's life on someone else's timeline. The fact that you can't seem to fit into conventional timelines might mean that you're being called to create your own. The restlessness you feel, the sense that something is missing, the feeling that you're meant for something different, these aren't signs that you're behind. They're signs that you're being called to lead. Picture yourself as an artist standing in front of a blank canvas. Society hands you a paint-by-number kit and tells you to fill in the predetermined spaces with the predetermined colors. But your soul is calling you to create something original, something that's never been painted before. The paint-by-number approach might be faster, but it won't produce the masterpiece you're meant to create. Your life is that blank canvas, and you're being called to paint something entirely your own. This requires tremendous courage because it means disappointing people who want you to follow their blueprint. It means accepting that your path might look messy, unconventional, or slow to others. It means trusting that your internal compass is more reliable than external expectations. But it also means creating a life that's authentic, meaningful, and uniquely yours. Jung believed that the greatest tragedy isn't failing to achieve what others expect of you. It's failing to become who you truly are. The pressure to be on time according to external schedules is actually pressure to betray your authentic self. The anxiety you feel about being behind is your soul's way of protecting you from living a life that isn't yours. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you pursue if you weren't worried about being too late? What would you create if you weren't concerned about catching up? These questions reveal something important. The very things you're afraid you're behind on might be the things you're most called to explore. You know that feeling when you're doing something that feels completely right, even if it doesn't make sense to others? When time seems to disappear and you lose yourself in the flow of the activity, that's your soul's timing revealing itself. That's what it feels like when you're aligned with your authentic rhythm. The more you can create space for these experiences, the more you'll understand your unique timing. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control your timing, the more you interfere with it. The more you worry about being behind, the more you slow down your natural process. The more you compare yourself to others, the more you disconnect from your own path. Trust is the key. Trust in your process. Trust in your timing. Trust in your unique way of becoming. Jung discovered that the psyche has its own seasons. just like nature. There are times for planting, times for growing, times for harvesting, and times for resting. Trying to harvest before you've planted or forcing growth during a natural resting period creates suffering. Learning to recognize and honor your psychological seasons is one of the most important skills you can develop. Picture yourself as a tree. In spring, you bud and grow new leaves. In summer, you flourish and provide shade. In autumn, you let go of what no longer serves you. In winter, you rest and gather strength for the next cycle. Would you criticize a tree for not producing fruit in winter? Would you tell it that it's behind because it's not leafy in February? Of course not. You'd recognize that the tree is following its natural cycle, and that each season has its own purpose and beauty. Your life follows the same pattern. There are seasons for action and seasons for reflection, seasons for expansion and seasons for contraction, seasons for external focus and seasons for internal work. The season you're in right now isn't better or worse than any other season. It's simply the season you need to be in for your continued growth. This understanding brings profound relief. You stop fighting against your natural cycles and start working with them. You stop judging yourself for being in a reflective season when others are in an action season. You stop trying to force growth when you're in a resting phase. You start to see that your timing is perfect because it's yours. Jung spent years studying what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that connect all of humanity. He discovered that we're all part of a larger tapestry, and that each person's individual timing contributes to the overall pattern. Your unique path, your specific timing, your particular way of becoming these aren't just for you. They're your contribution to the collective human story. You know that feeling when you meet someone who's clearly living their authentic life? There's something magnetic about them, something that inspires you to be more yourself. That's the gift that people who honor their own timing give to the world. They give others permission to stop rushing, to trust their process, to follow their own rhythm. Let me ask you this. What if your journey is exactly what someone else needs to see? What if your willingness to honor your own timing gives others permission to do the same? What if your refusal to rush is actually a form of leadership? Jung believed that the most important work we can do is to become fully ourselves, not a better version of someone else, not a more successful version of who we think we should be, but the most authentic version of who we actually are. This work can't be rushed, can't be forced, can't be done according to external schedules. It happens in its own time, in its own way, through its own mysterious process. Picture yourself as a master craftsperson creating a work of art. You could rush the process, skip steps, use shortcuts. The result might look acceptable from a distance, but up close, you'd see the flaws, the lack of depth, the absence of soul. But when you take the time the work requires, when you honor each step of the process, when you trust the natural unfolding of creation, you create something magnificent, something that could only come from you. Your life is that work of art. Every experience, every challenge, every moment of confusion is adding depth, texture, and meaning to your creation. The fact that it's taking time doesn't mean you're behind it, means you're creating something worth the wait. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of seeing your life as a race to be won, you start seeing it as a story to be lived. Instead of measuring your worth by external achievements, you start measuring it by internal growth. Instead of comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20, you start appreciating the unique beauty of your own narrative. You know that feeling when you're reading a really good book? You don't want to rush to the end. You want to savor each page, each paragraph, each beautifully crafted sentence. That's how you can approach your life when you stop worrying about being behind. You can start savoring the chapter you're in instead of rushing to get to the next one. Jung discovered that the people who were most fulfilled in later life were not those who had achieved the most external success, but those who had become the most authentic versions of themselves. They had honored their own timing, followed their own path, and created lives that were meaningful rather than just impressive. Let me ask you something. What would it feel like to trust your timing completely? What would you do differently if you knew that everything was unfolding exactly as it should? How would you show up to your life if you believed that you were exactly where you needed to be? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're invitations to a different way of being. When you trust your timing, you stop wasting energy on anxiety about the past or worry about the future. You become present to the gifts that are available to you right now. You start to see opportunities that were invisible when you were focused on what you thought you should be doing. You know those moments when everything suddenly makes sense? When you can see the thread that connects all the seemingly random events of your life? When you understand why you needed to go through exactly what you went through to become who you are? That's the moment when you see your perfect timing revealing itself. But here's what's beautiful. You don't have to wait for that moment of understanding to start honoring your timing. You can start right now, wherever you are, whatever your circumstances. You can start treating your life as sacred, your path as perfect, your timing as divine. You can start believing that you're exactly where you need to be. This isn't about becoming complacent or giving up on your dreams. It's about pursuing your dreams from a place of trust rather than anxiety, from a place of alignment rather than force. It's about understanding that the most powerful action comes from inner stillness, and that the most effective progress happens when you're in harmony with your natural rhythm. Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche, and his conclusion was simple. We are all exactly where we need to be for our soul's evolution. The challenges we face, the timing of our opportunities, the people we meet, the lessons we learn, it's all perfectly orchestrated by an intelligence far greater than our conscious mind can comprehend. Picture yourself as a note in a vast symphony. You might not understand how your particular sound fits into the overall composition, but the conductor knows exactly when you need to play, how long you need to hold your note, and how your contribution enhances the beauty of the whole. Your life is that note, and you're being conducted by the wisdom of your own soul. This understanding brings such peace. You stop fighting against your circumstances and start working with them. You stop judging your journey and start honoring it. You stop trying to be someone else and start celebrating who you are. You realize that you're not behind, you're right on time. The anxiety you feel about being behind is actually homesickness for your authentic self. It's your soul calling you home to your true nature, your real timing, your actual path. When you answer that call, when you stop trying to live someone else's life on someone else's schedule, you discover something amazing. You've been exactly where you needed to be all along. You know that feeling when you finally come home after a long journey? That sense of relief, of rightness, of being exactly where you belong. That's what it feels like when you align with your authentic timing. You realize that home isn't a place, it's a way of being. And you can come home to yourself right now, right where you are. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human life is what he called self-realization, the process of becoming fully yourself. This isn't something that happens at a specific age or after achieving certain milestones. It's a lifelong journey that unfolds at its own pace, in its own way, according to its own mysterious wisdom. Let me ask you one more question. What if you could trust that your soul knows exactly what it's doing? What if you could believe that your timing is perfect even when it doesn't feel that way? What if you could understand that you're not behind because there's nowhere to be except exactly where you are? The truth is, you've been preparing for this moment your entire life. Every experience, every challenge, every disappointment, every joy, it's all been leading you to this understanding. You're not behind because you couldn't be behind. You're part of a perfect unfolding that's been happening since the day you were born. Your anxiety about timing is actually a sign that you're ready to step into your authentic rhythm. Your dissatisfaction with conventional timelines is actually a call to create your own. Your sense of being different is actually a gift to the world. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to become who you're meant to be. The river of your life has been flowing perfectly all along. It's taken you through valleys and over mountains, through peaceful meadows and turbulent rapids, but it's always been flowing toward your authentic self. Trust the river. Trust your timing. Trust that you're exactly where you need to be. You've always been the one you've been waiting for. Now, finally, you can see it. You're not behind. You're right on time. And your time is now.